Well, good morning. Nice. So, having a good weekend so far? Enjoying the cool fall weather? Yeah, we should pray for that too, right? So we're in this series on the minor prophets, and so often when people think about the minor prophets, the first thing that doesn't come to their mind is like, ooh, that's one of my favorite parts of the Bible, right? Because it was written like more than 2.5 millennia ago, and it's written in some styles of language and genre that can be hard to understand and get a hold of, and just the whole context and everything. And what I have watched is over the years, people, when you can't get hooked into that deeper side of the story, you kind of lose that connection. And what happens with parts of the Bible like that is that they just seem like they're boring, irrelevant, like rules of some sort that we don't fully understand. I don't want you to be reading the Bible that way. That's part of the reason for this series is I want to take some of those parts of the Bible that would maybe be harder to engage and understand them, and I want you to see them in the larger story of what God is doing. I want you to see them in a way that that connects them to Scripture, because I want all of us at this church to find Scripture is something that just keeps pulling us deeper into this sense of relationship with God. I want Scripture to be something that just keeps opening you up to the deeper questions that we have in our spiritual journey, those things that cause us to grow and pull us forward in all of this. So, the second care that I have with all of this is specific to today, and it will be with each of these books. And we're going to be looking at the prophet Habakkuk. And so you should have gotten a card like this that has some notes on it, and even a fill in the blank on the back, and just a few details to help you understand more about the book itself. And so my care with Habakkuk specifically is that I want us all to care and wrestle with a question that we will see that Habakkuk cares deeply about. And here's the question that he's wrestling through all through the book that is called Habakkuk. And it's this: if God is good, why are there so many bad things going on in this world, right? Talk about something relevant, right? Just think about yourself in this moment, and you're just like, man, that's a good question. When you see what's happening in Ukraine and Russia or the Middle East or someplace else, and you're like, God, why don't you do something about the suffering or the problems that we sure aren't able to solve or work out in this whole thing? Or maybe it's a little bit closer to home. Maybe there's someone in your family that you know, and they have been in a long struggle with anxiety or depression or something that just, you can see it holding them back, and you have prayed and you've asked and you've said, like, why did they have to struggle through that? And they're a good person. And I see people in this world that don't care about you at all, or don't care about other people. And it's like, and they don't have those same struggles. Or maybe it's when you heard, the word cancer, and it's changed your whole world upside down. Or as simple as just something unfair is going on in your life or around you. And you just say, God, if you're good, why don't you intervene? Why don't you do something about it, okay? Which brings us to the book of Habakkuk, because there's something unique with this book that I want you to see in all of this. And it gets how it is different from pretty much all the other minor prophets that we'll see. So when you look at all the minor prophets and even the major prophets, and the only difference between those two are the size of their books, okay? That's what divides them up. And normally they're always speaking on behalf of God, right? So it's like God says something to the prophet, and this is an exact likeness of Habakkuk. God says something to the prophet, and then the prophet says something, right, to the people, right? There's the people, and the prophet is speaking on God's behalf to the people. Here's what's so different about the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is not speaking on behalf of God. He is speaking on behalf of himself, and his audience is God. That's who he's talking to. okay? And that makes this very different, right? And so you think about this question, God, why, if you're good, see, now you realize he's talking directly to God. If you're good, why do all these bad things happen? Look at how the book opens up. Turn to Habakkuk chapter 1, starting in verse 2. And you'll find Habakkuk back in the sticky pages of your Bible. Except for most of you are probably using your phone or an iPad. So you just go to Habakkuk. Verse 2 says this, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Do you see how frustrated he is in this? And who is he talking to? He's talking to God. And here's the gift of this whole thing, and I want you to think of this as a gift that we get from Habakkuk. Because this is a conversation going on between he and God, because God's gonna respond at several moments in this. We have the gift of seeing this prophet of God work through this issue that we struggle with, all of us struggle with. And it's a gift because we get to see, like, from the inside what goes on between the two of them, because we need that. And so Habakkuk starts off and he has been struggling with this, and he lays into this. Look at what he says. Look back at verse 2. Right, I cry out to you, violence, but you do not save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds, right? Ever feel like that? Ever, like, and it's the thing of, like, God, I've been praying. Can't you fix this thing over there? And so as we look at this, I want you to think about that question in your life. My hope is this morning that you're gonna walk away and that you'll understand this little book called Habakkuk. And more than that, you will understand Habakkuk's faith journey through this, because I think that'll help you and me in our faith journey in those moments that we find ourselves wrestling with this same question. So let me give you a little background on Habakkuk, just a little as we dive into this. First, it's written in what is called a lament style of language or genre, which means it is this over the top. It is fiery. It is filled with emotion, and that is what it is meant to do. It is meant to invoke an emotion and communicate things in the most extreme, because you're trying to get someone's attention, right? So there's other places in the Bible that use lament language. And when they use it, right, usually with people, right, it's the prophet speaking to people, it's meant like, how can I just so over the top in such an extreme way have you go, whoa, I gotta pay attention to this. Habakkuk is using this language with God. He wants to get God's attention in this. He also, which isn't uncommon with lament language, but he uses a ton of imagery, a ton of pictures to communicate through all of this. And so as we walk through this, I want to look at 3 distinct pictures that Habakkuk paints. And I think by looking at these 3 pictures, it'll help us all get like this overarching understanding of what's going on in the book of Habakkuk. And more importantly, understanding this kind of faith journey that he's going on with this. So the first one we're gonna look at is this image of a sandstorm. So when you think about like a sandstorm, think about like what you've seen here in Arizona, right? Think about like between here and Phoenix. If you've ever been driving up there, and they call them a haboob, like the giant, terrible name. And I'm not gonna try and write that up there because I would get myself in trouble accidentally probably. Right, it's just like this wall of sand and dirt in this storm, and it just moves across the desert. And it's like it just swallows up and envelops everything in its path. Nothing can stop it. And this is the first picture that he kind of begins to paint. And he's describing all of these injustices that he is seeing in Judah. And remember, last week we looked at a prophet by the name of Amos, who was primarily speaking to the northern kingdom above Judah called Israel. And you'll notice on the map behind me that you only see Judah. And there's a reason for this, because Habakkuk is not just talking to the people that are a problem in Judah. There's all this injustice and problems with the leaders, but on the world stage, they have been in this struggle. And the reason Israel isn't up on this map is because about 100 years before this, there was an empire called Assyria. And Assyria started up by the Tigris River, and they became powerful, and they swept north and west along the Fertile Crescent until they captured all of the lands until they got to the Mediterranean, and then swept south, and they literally took out the nation of Israel. So you've heard of the 12 tribes of Israel. Understand at this point when he writes this book, 10 of those 12 tribes have disappeared like to the wind on the face of the earth. No one knows. They've been hauled off in captivity. Very few of them have survived. The ones that have they've lost their identity, everything. Judah is all alone, right? It would be the tribe of Judah and Benjamin and maybe a few stragglers from some of the other tribes. And it's like, God, like, you didn't stop the Assyrians, and they're awful. But to make matters worse, there's another empire, the Babylonian Empire, that has since become very, very powerful. In fact, more powerful than the Assyrians. They swept down all the way to the Persian Gulf. They took all of Assyria. They captured everything Assyria had. Assyria has now been wiped off the face of the earth. They took more land than what the Assyrians took. And now they are moving steadily right towards Judah. They've come in from the north. They've swept around and taken all the lands that Assyria never even got to the east of Judah. And now Judah has Babylon just moving in closer and closer on two sides. And the fear and the trepidation in the city of Jerusalem, in the entire region of Judah, like it's overwhelming. And what Judah is seeing is, right, they would be getting the news reports. They would be finding out how they're slaughtering and killing people, innocent people. And prophets like Habakkuk would have been praying, God, stop them, don't let them overthrow, like we are your people. And now it is just becoming more and more apparent that Babylon's just gonna sweep right over them, and he can't stand this. And he calls out the evil in this kind of lamenting kind of language. Look at how he describes this. Look at verse 8. It says this, and he's speaking of the Babylonian army here. It says, they fly like an eagle swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind. There's that storm. And gather prisoners like sand. There's that storm. It's just like they just envelop everything. And it's evil, and it's causing all of this suffering. And for Habakkuk, he just looks at this and he just like, God, why are you doing this? And understand this too. This is not just a theoretical exercise about God's justice or when God acts. These are people that Habakkuk knows. He's gonna see his friends and his family, the people he's been ministering to as a and he's just like, God, they're twice as evil. He goes over this, and they're twice as evil as anything that you've seen done in Judah. And why? We have prayed, why are you letting this happen? And he talks about this. And here's where we see this question. Look at verse 13. He says this, right? Why? Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? And his great question through this whole thing, right, is why? Why? If you are gonna do this, God, can I know why? Because this makes no sense based on what I know about your character, what you've said to us. Why? And maybe you've got that same question. See, this is why a book that's more than 2.5 millennia old has something to say to us. Because they're struggling with some of the same questions as us, right? What's your sandstorm? What is the sandstorm that you look at and you just say, God, I sure thought you were going to answer my prayer, because this sure seems like the kind of prayer you would answer. And you haven't. And I'm left asking why. What is that for you? You know, I want to share with you a little bit about, and I've shared in the past about the loss of my mom. And those of you who maybe haven't been here that long, it's the first time you've heard me talk about it. But I want to talk about it maybe from a perspective I've never talked about it before, and that is through my own faith journey. What I went through for those 7+ years that my mom struggled with and then lost her life to ovarian cancer. I remember when we found out that she had cancer. And think about a moment where you have gotten bad news, something that maybe challenged your faith. And I remember the anxiety that you feel and the worry and all the questions. And you've got like all these questions like, okay, how bad is the cancer? And where, what's the prognosis and all of these things. But then there's a moment, right, where you rally back to your faith. And you think, okay, God, we're gonna pray for this. And God, I believe in you. And I remember the elders of this church praying for my mom. And, our family prayed for me. And many of you prayed for my mom, that if you've been here that long. And I remember there's these moments where like the prognosis seemed so bad. And yet as we prayed and as she started treatments on this, like, it became better and better. And I still remember a time sitting in a doctor's office with my dad and my sister, and the doctor saying, you know what, I think we can end the treatment here. I can find no signs of cancer at all. Oh my gosh, what a day, right? And you just walk out of there and just like, it wasn't so many months ago that like, I didn't even know if I'd have my mom at this point. And to have a doctor say, can't even find the cancer right now, right? And you ride on a high because you just feel like, God, you answered some prayers. You were there for us. And God feels real and strong, and it is good. And so many of you know what that is like. And so many of you have a story of what you went through, and it stayed there. And I've got stories in my life like that are wonderful, right? And with cancer and too many of you know this because you've gone through this, right? There's that kind of magic number of 5. If you can make it 5 years, like the likelihood of it reoccurring goes down so significantly. Like they even use the word like cure sometimes, if you can make it those 5 years. And I remember getting past 1 year and 2 year and 3 years, right? And then you really start praying because you're just like, oh man, like I know we're a long ways off. And then 4 years comes. And it's like you don't want to get your hopes up too much, but you are praying, God, let's make it to that 5-year mark. And I remember making it to 4.5 years and getting closer. And just within a couple months of 5 years, a test comes back. And they're like, probably have the cancer back, right? And it just crushes you, right? But you rally back. And I remember those ups and downs. And I remember she went through some of the treatments and it looked really good. And then there would be, at one moment she had these complications with something that was unrelated to the cancer, should have been caught, and it wasn't caught. And it made things worse. And I remember a moment where my sister and I actually drove across town to talk with a doctor that she had originally worked with because she had to have this surgery that was basic surgery. And we were just like, something is not right in this whole thing. And again, not saying anyone was malicious or did something terrible, just something got missed. And we pulled into this doctor and he found something and he realized like there was a little bit of damage that was done to one of her heart valves. And I remember going through this kind of the ups and downs. And one of the things that I came to realize is that you just cannot stay in that place of great pain while asking why at the same time, right? If God's not answering you and you're in pain and you keep saying, God, like why? You can't stay in that place forever, because at some point you hit a mark where you feel disillusioned or frustrated or angry with God, because he's not even told you why, right? It wasn't just that in my faith journey I was praying for my mom's healing. It was like, God, help me understand why as well. Because this woman was a really good woman. She was like the glue, not just our family. She was like a kind of relational glue in this larger extended family of my in-laws, and my sister's family and my wife's, brothers and sisters and their family. Like there was this thing that she was like this hub, and she was so good for so many people. And I was just thinking, God, it's not like I'm trying to pick somebody else in the family, okay? But this just doesn't make sense at all. And it was just like God never said why. I just don't think a human being can stay in that place forever before you finally start to feel a little frustrated with God, or you start to feel disillusioned, right? And I remember reaching a point in this where I literally, I remember going through this whole thing, and I was just like, it's not even the cancer. Like, she's suffering terribly. And it's just something that would have been caught 999 times out of 1,000. And why, with my mom, did it get missed and it caused so many problems? And I remember telling God, and this is just part of my journey. I remember saying, God, I will be strong through this, because that's like who you made me to be. But I will not pretend. Because I was frustrated with God. I said, I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to pretend that I'm okay with this. I've been in ministry too many years, and part of the faith journey, I told God, part of the faith journey you have brought me on in my own ministry to try and cultivate in people is not to pretend, to be on a faith journey with you, God, right, where you can be honest, and pretending is not what you've called us to. Because there's too often as Christians, we can find ourselves in this spot where we feel like I've got to pretend like things are okay when they're not okay, right? Or I've got to defend God's reputation in this moment. I've got to come up with some good reason why there's something bad happening. And I just said, God, I have prayed. I'm not going to go down that path. I will not pretend. And then as it turned out, we kind of went through this whole thing, and this doctor got involved, and we're able to restart my mom's cancer treatment, and things were starting to really look good. And we were getting closer to Christmas, and we were actually making family plans for like after Christmas. And then she just got so weak, right? And I remember there was a moment that I think it was just my sister and I, where the doctor kind of walked into where we were sitting, and I remember he said, I need you to know that your mom is like on the razor's edge. I'm like, but she seems like she's doing really good right now. He says, here's why. He said, she needs to get stronger before we can keep moving forward with this cancer treatment. But she can't get stronger until we get that heart valve fixed. And he said, and it's a simple procedure. I know it's on the heart, but I know a surgeon, and this would be a no-brainer surgery. Average person, they're out of the hospital like in a day. But we can't do that surgery on your mom until we're able to finish the current treatment that we're trying to finish right now. And he says, do you see the problem? Because we can't finish that treatment until she's stronger, but she can't get stronger until the heart valve is fixed, and can't fix the heart valve until, and it just, right? It's just like we're so close. And I was so frustrated with God. I was just like, this doesn't even have to be the cancer issue. It's just this thing that happened like a month before, because she went a couple weeks and just suffered from malnutrition, which is what damaged the heart valve. And I'm just like, I can't, like, this is crazy. God, why? Why? But here's the thing. Here's the thing that I learned out of this, right? You can't pretend, because pretending keeps us from the struggle. And the struggle is always the place where you grow. And this is the thing that makes this book so valuable to me, because Habakkuk will not pretend. He steps into the struggle. He steps in with a kind of honesty that is breathtaking. And I mean, when we first read it, and I'm going to read it to you here, it kind of makes you want to go, is it okay for a person to talk to God this way? Which gets us to this next picture that I want you to see here. And it's a picture of a watchtower. And so this image of a watchtower becomes really important. Because what he basically says is, I'm gonna become the man on the watchtower. I'm gonna become the man on the wall with this. Here's what he says. This is how chapter 2 opens up. Look at chapter 2, verse 1. It says this, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me. And who is he talking about? He's talking about God. Here's why this is so powerful. Why do you put a watchman on the watchtower? Who are they watching out for? The person you are worried about who will come and do you harm. You put a watchman on the wall to look for who? Your enemy. Habakkuk, he's reached a point where he's just said, God, I have prayed and I am watching the Babylonians just like mow everything and everyone down like some crazy sandstorm, and they're right on our doorfront. I have prayed to you. I have asked you why. Not only will you not stop it, you won't even tell me why. I'm gonna take my position on the wall, but what I'm looking for is you, and I'm waiting for an answer. God, why? Why will you do this? He doesn't back off. There's no pretending on his part. And what I want to say, friends, is while that may seem harsh and crazy, I think part of the reason God puts this book in the Bible is because there's something that he's going through in his faith journey that has a lesson for us that is so good here, right? Because honesty with God, honesty, even when it's scary, empowers us to see or understand God in ways we couldn't otherwise see it. When we feel like, oh my gosh, I don't understand, and someone says, well, like, why is that terrible thing happening in the world or that terrible thing happening in your life? And we pull back and we're just like, oh my gosh, well, it's all good and they deserve this or they deserve that or God, this, and we try and paint some lovely picture to defend God or come on. We're the ones that get stuck sometimes. And he gets up, visually on that wall and says, God, I'm not gonna pretend that I'm not hurt. And at this moment, I wonder if you're not my enemy. Because here's what it does. It opens him up to see and understand God in a way that he just couldn't before. Here's the crazy thing about it. God actually explains something to him in the very first chapter that is so important, but he just misses it. And you know what? I miss it. I bet you miss it. We miss it so easily because this question of why, it's on our heart, it's on our mind. That's normal. In fact, it's normal to miss it until sometimes we get into the struggle and we finally begin to see it. I want you to see where God actually gives him an answer to something, and Habakkuk just misses it. Turn to Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5. He says this, and he actually, in this moment, he actually mentions the Babylonians, and he's gonna use them, and he says this in verse 5. For I am going to do something in your days, catch this, that you would not believe even if you were told. It's like, Habakkuk, there are some questions that even if I gave you the answer to them, you wouldn't understand it. It's an answer, right? There are things that God understands and gets at some level that finite human beings living in a space-time bubble that we're in, that we can't understand it. And God literally tells him in the first chapter, you wouldn't understand it, but you gotta trust me. But you're not gonna understand it. But here's where we go with this, and I don't wanna say, don't do this, because it's where our heart goes. We still wanna say, but why, God? Why? And I think sometimes we have to go through that till we get to the place where all of a sudden we're like, okay, God, I'm watching what's happening in Haiti. I'm watching what's happening to somebody I love. I'm watching injustice. And everything I know about you is you love people. And I'm watching people suffer. I'm watching something happen that's unjust, and you're a just God. Why? And we don't get an answer. And he's saying sometimes we can't understand it. With my mom, there was a moment where after that point where She couldn't have the surgery to fix that heart valve. And because of that, she was just struggling to get strong enough. And it was becoming more and more apparent that she wasn't gonna get strong enough to have that surgery so that she could complete the treatment. And it just felt terrible. And I'm sitting in the living room with my 2 kids, and we were watching a movie or a show together. I don't remember what it was. And it ended, and Angie wasn't there. And I remember just sitting there after the show ended, and it just hit me all of a sudden. It hit me that here are my young kids, and they're not gonna get to have their Grammy at their high school graduation. And I have 2 nieces that I just adore, and they're not gonna get to have their Grammy at a high school graduation. And there's gonna be weddings that they're not gonna have their Grammy for. And there's gonna be moments where that woman could just, hold on to somebody with such unconditional love in ways that are just amazing. And I knew what that was like because I grew up with her, and I wanted my kids and my nieces to have more of that. And I just didn't like that moment thinking about that because I knew we're gonna lose her. And surprise, surprise, as I was sitting there, I was like, man, I'm gonna have some tears over these thoughts, right? And at that time, my kids, they hadn't seen me cry that much. They were young, and now they'd be like, man, catch any 3 sermons and you'll probably see him cry once or twice, right? That's who he is. But at that point, I was just like, oh man, I'm gonna have tears, and then they're gonna ask questions. And for one moment, I was just like, I'm just gonna get up and go into the bedroom, and I'll cry in there as I think about this. And then I was just like, no, God, I'm not. Because I'm not gonna pretend. If I've got tears right now, I'm gonna have tears. And I don't know what I was thinking with God in that moment. But the tears started to come, and it was my daughter was the first one to go, Dad, are you gonna cry? And my eyes are getting watery. Are you gonna cry? And I'm like, oh, I probably am. Why? And both my kids are like, is this okay? What's going on? And I just started to just say, Grammy's not doing good, and we may lose her. And they were like, and then they asked me again. They're like, are you okay? And I said, I'm not okay, but I will be okay. They didn't understand this idea that I'm not okay and that I'll be okay. And so then I started saying, well, you have to go through this mourning process, and we're gonna go through that process, and and then I started trying to explain the steps of a mourning process and how they just became more confused, and they were not understanding this, and I could tell it was shaking them up more. And all of a sudden, I had a moment where I said, oh my gosh, this is me. I wanna know why. But in the same way, I am realizing I want my kids, there's something I want them to understand about how they're gonna have to mourn the loss of someone they love. I understand something about this, and they can't. And then I just realized, I bet there's things that God understands and answers he has that even if he told me, I couldn't believe it or I wouldn't understand it. And it's like God says, yeah, Habakkuk, I explained that to you. There's things that I can tell you, but you wouldn't believe them if I told you. You couldn't understand it. Not because you're bad, not because you don't want to listen. It's just you are a finite creature. And there's just some things that God gets and understands, and you know what? We're not. And at that moment, it was like, okay, now what do I do? And there's something really beautiful about coming to a moment where you can be angry with God. You can be angry that you don't understand. You can say, God, I wish you would have made me so I could have understood this, right? It's just like whatever you want. But in that moment that you just go, okay, there are gonna be things that I can't fully understand. And the way you get to that place is with this kind of honesty of saying, I'm not gonna pretend. Just like he says, this is where I'm at. I feel like I've got to be a watchman on the wall. But it opens you up. Here's what it does, friends. It opens you up to deeper questions that maybe you really do need an answer to. And sometimes we don't get to those questions until we can trust God that there are some questions we just aren't going to have an answer for. And so Habakkuk has this moment where he lays it all out before God. And then God does this really interesting thing. There's one of the longer sections in this book is called, or we call it, the 5 woes, where God walks through And he begins talking about all the things that bother him in this thing. And what's strange is he uses this very graphic, lamenting kind of language where you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, what is God? God seems angry and upset and it's over the top and everything. But you know what he's doing? And I love this. He's using Habakkuk's kind of language. He's speaking Habakkuk here in this moment. And as he walks through these 5 woes, what he's walking out is it's like, you know what? Those injustices, oh my gosh, yes, I see those. And those drive me crazy. And that is unjust. And I hate that. And when I see people are hurting, it breaks my heart. And and he goes through this whole thing. And what Habakkuk begins to realize is God actually sees everything I've been seeing. God sees me in my pain. In fact, God sees more than what I can even see. And this becomes this kind of breakthrough for Habakkuk. And here's the lesson that he gets from it, right? God sees and feels everything Habakkuk sees, even the things he can't. There's a whole bunch of things going on in this that he sees that were missed by Habakkuk. And here's what he realizes. God cares. And that's the question that Habakkuk needed answered maybe more than why. If I can't know why, I need to know, do you see me? Do you care? And here's the strangest thing. The weirdest twist in this little book happens between chapters 2 and 3. Here's how chapter 3 kind of opens up. Look back at chapter 3. He starts off, and Habakkuk is talking about God, and he says this halfway through verse 3. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. And we could go on and read some, and it's just like, who's this? Where's the guy that was just like, I'm gonna be on the wall, and I'm gonna, I see you, God. Like, what, I mean, it's just like, he's saying stuff that we're like, are you allowed to talk to God that way? Because isn't this what like causes people to get struck by lightning or something? And I mean, he is mad and angry at God. And then all of a sudden, in chapter 3, it's like, oh my gosh, God's glory just covers the heavens. And he's like, and you're just like, here's why. Suddenly, he's got his answer to whether or not God cares. God goes through the 5 woes, and he never explains why. That question never gets answered. But the care question gets answered. And so here's what I want to walk out for you here. Is when you find yourself in that place, asking why. That's a perfectly normal, natural place to be. It's not like you should, like, what's wrong with you for being there? But here's what I would challenge you with. Be honest. And if you find that you keep asking that question, why, and there's something painful or that hurts in your life or suffering that you see, and you're not getting an answer. And you know what? Sometimes God gives us an answer. I'll say this. Sometimes God tells us why, and it's wonderful. Go to the bank with that, okay? But when you find yourself at the place where God's not telling me why, keep being honest. Even when it becomes disillusioning, even when it angers you about God, you keep being honest with God, because we have this guy thousands of years ago who shows us God can handle our frustration, our disappointment, and our anger with him. He's like emotionally healthy, right? You can be honest with God even when you're upset with him, and it will open you up to deeper questions. And maybe those are the questions God is longing to answer in your life. Like, maybe I care about you. I got up. I've realized I can't answer my kids' questions in this moment. And I just said, hey, here's what you need. I actually got up and I sat between the two of them and I put my arms around them. And I've got tears and I'm just saying, I just need you to know, I've got you. And it will be okay. You will be okay. And that's all they needed. They didn't need a bunch of, psychological, here's how you go through the mourning process thing by their dad who's, trying to pastor them, in some way. Like, they were 2 little kids and they just needed to know their dad had them, right? So how do we move forward? There's some practical things that come right out of chapter 3 that I want to just run through for you. And if you have your card, just take some notes on this. Because he uses this, here's the last picture that he uses here on this. And it's of the Red Sea. And it's the Red Sea hundreds of years before this, when the Israelites were fleeing the bondage and the suffering they had under Egypt, that empire. And God delivered them through the Red Sea. And God is like, do you remember that? And you remember how no one back then could have, they could have never surmised in any way that God had, that one, God even cared about them, and that God could have delivered them. And he said, I want you to take the image of what I once did in your past story and let it help you hold 3 things as you seek to move forward in this, okay? Let me run through these 3 things. I was gonna do some more with this, but let me just jump to these 3 things here, because here's what he shows them in this. First, there's a kind of hope that you can seek. When you're in that desperate spot and you're just like, why? I want you to look for hope. And here's the hope that you can find. And God goes back. You have hope that you can hang on to, because back in the Red Sea, you know why I delivered your people, your fathers, your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers and grandmothers? Because I cared. And if you can know that I care about you, then you can have hope, even while you're mad at me. But I want you to pursue hope. And here's what I would encourage you to do. Pray for hope. If you're at a moment where you're just like, God, I need to know that you care about me, pray for that. Pray for that. And you might find that God answers that prayer through something you listen to. It might be through a friend. It might be a coworker. God may intervene in your life in some unexpected way that just leaves you at a place that all of a sudden you realize God sees me and God cares about me, right? I got to have that experience. Even through the loss of my mom, there were these moments where I look back and I realized God was showing me that he saw me, and he saw my nieces, and he saw my kids, he saw my dad, right? He saw us, he cared. There's a reason for hope. Next one, faith. When you're in that spot, you have to move forward in faith. But there's a kind of faith, there's a way, there's a reason why you can move forward with that faith that becomes really important that comes out of this story. And it's this: move forward believing it is safe and okay to be honest with God. Don't move forward pretending. You don't have to defend God's reputation. If you're angry and you're talking with people and just saying, I don't know what God's up to in this moment, and it kind of worries me, it makes me angry at him. You don't have to defend God. You don't have to show why God is good to every single, you get to be honest in your life. Do you understand? This is the thing that separates Jesus followers from every other world religion there is out there. World religions, just watch, they always have to defend their version of what God is or the religion or whatever it is. If you're a Jesus follower, we don't have to defend God. This is the beautiful thing, because what God is saying is, I want you to just be honest with me, right? Last thing that just seems kind of strange, but we really need it, is joy. And you're like, when I'm in the middle of being angry with God because I'm suffering through something that's causing me pain, joy? I want you to look at how this book ends. Look at verse 18. This is almost at the very end of the book. He closes out with this: yet I will, and no circumstance has changed, right? I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. And at this point, when he writes those words, Habakkuk knows that desert storm that has been flowing through the desert, moving its way to Judah, called the Babylonian Empire, is going to swallow us up. But I'm gonna move forward with hope, and I'm gonna move forward with faith, and I'm gonna be honest with God. And I will look for the joy that can be had, because here's the thing. If you can live out of hope and faith, joy becomes important. And let me put it this way: you have to let some light in. You have to open up the sunroof of your life and you have to just say, God, if there's joy to be had, help me find it. And you've got to look for it. Because as you navigate those things that are hard or difficult, like you've got to find a way to navigate that. I even think about, for all my tears over losing my mom, right? And just still feel it to this day. But there were so many things that we look back on and laugh about and the joys and things. I was thinking about this morning. My mom loved figuring out what her grandkids' favorite color was. And then she just built the whole world around that color for that grandchild. My son loved the color green. And so he would go and spend the weekend, like with my parents. And she would read him, Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham, right? Because he loved green. But my mom would not stop there because she took green food coloring. And she would then, after reading Green Eggs and Ham, make him green eggs and ham, right? And they'd do that all weekend. We almost ended up rushing my son to the hospital one time because he came back from a weekend with my mom, and he's like, 1 or something, and he starts pooping green. And we're like, oh, that can't be good. Didn't realize he was eating green eggs and ham, and that's why he was pooping green. And I just think, oh my gosh, my mom, hey, you went a little too far, Mom, right? It's just but here's the thing. Open up the sunroof and let some light in. And you can ask why, but you keep moving forward with hope and faith and joy, and God will grow you, and you will find your way through. And friends, that is the book of Habakkuk.